Welcome to our channel, where we set out to explore wonderful great works of literature.
While dressed in elegant clothing, because why the hell not?
So today we're going to try something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
This is a bit of a departure from the classics that we typically be covering.
Yeah.
And personally, it's just something I don't do all too often. But one of my friends actually two of my friends recommended two of the books that we'll be covering today.
Yeah. So the first one is...
The first one is called Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. And it was published originally in 2009. It's a mystery novel by Olga Tokarczuk, she's Polish.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually a very well-known Polish writer, and I think in 2018 just won the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Prize?
Yeah, Nobel Prize for Literature.
And she was up for a shortlist for the Man Booker.
And that's what this one is, the Man Booker Prize. It won the Man Booker Prize.
This one did? Oh,
yes,
okay.
I believe so. Yeah.
We can never remember the title, but we'll talk about what the significance of the title is in a minute.
Yeah.
And then the other book.
So the other book is by it's upside down. Yeah. The other book is by a gentleman named Romain Gary, and he is considered one of the most prolific, well-known, best-selling writers of French literature. And he was like a journalist. He was very famous of the latter half of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And this story is interesting, not in the sense of the actual story itself, which may be interesting to many of you out there, but his biography is very interesting. And the story behind the story is very interesting.
Okay, so let's go back to the Plow Over the Bones one.
Yeah.
I can never remember the title.
So this essentially, it's a hard title to remember.
Yeah.
And, I always have to go back, refer to it again. So essentially, the title derives from a poem by William Blake, who is a famous English poet, a very mystical poet, almost very reactionary in a way. He had this very strong values and strong beliefs during sort of society in London and England at the time. And he was quite revolutionary in his religiosity, spirituality, and politics, and all these different sort of domains. So
he was quoted throughout this book quite often.
Yeah.
Because one of the characters was supposed to be translating.
The main character, as well as her friend, right? So essentially, it's derived from the poem Proverbs of Hell. And I'm just going to quickly read the section that she got the title from. And it says, "In seed time, learn. In harvest, teach. In winter, enjoy. Drive your cart and your plow over the bones of the dead." So, general overview.
Yeah. I was captivated throughout the whole novel. Like, my overall impression is that it was interesting. It wasn't I didn't find it boring at any point.
No.
But it was
I'm
not used to. I guess I'm just not used to the type of composition. Yeah.
So essentially, let's basically say it was a mystery novel, a supernatural style mystery novel.
Not a thriller though. I wouldn't call it a thriller.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a murder mystery.
Yeah, and it was maybe I shouldn't say supernatural, but there was some sort of quirkiness about it. There was something
more
otherworldly.
Quirky than supernatural. Natural.
Yeah, and right, exactly. And the author's been known to write sort of very mythical style tales that kind of verge the bend the reality that we live in.
Yeah.
And so this lady, she lives out in the countryside with a few other in a small village
simply
on the border of the Czech Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And she is rather strange in the way that she likes to give people nicknames, and so she refers to them. I found it rather challenging to get into the book at first because she's referring to these people by these strange names.
See, I found that easier to follow than reading Polish names.
Yeah.
Because she'd call them Dizzy instead of the first name, or Bigfoot to describe. She found, which is funny because I think a lot of people do this but more with acquaintances. I think it's more common to be someone you just, not even an acquaintance, just someone a passerby you happen to frequently see who you've never introduced yourself to, or like the grocery store clerk. You might describe them as a prominent feature that they have.
Yeah.
For example,
we
call
know
a grocery guy named Chicken Boy.
Yeah, Chicken
and we
Boy.
just remember we've never been introduced, but rather she kind of crosses these common things that people do, but pushes it to make it awkward almost, or weird. so it shows you that there's something like quite different about her, and beyond quirky. It's like beyond quirky. It's a little bit weird.
Yeah, very eccentric.
Yeah, eccentric.
Yeah, and so I found it rather difficult to get into the book at first because I didn't know who she referring to.
Yeah.
What are the books? What generally is the sort of the thrust of the book? And she was also there was a lot of interaction with animals as well.
And I was confused because Sean was like, I think she's an animal. Like
I thought,
so we weren't even sure if she was a human, male, female, what it was.
Yeah, was this a child speaking?
I was like,
is this an adult?
Weird. It's an animal. So I was picturing all these like little animals until clearly you figure out that it's a human talking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, the introduction was pretty weird.
Yeah, so you kind of have to push through it, and then it starts to get a little bit more interesting. So essentially what happens is she's got this real beef with this one guy who lives just across the way in a hut across her little road. And he's dead. She finds him dead.
With a friend.
Yeah.
They both find her not alone.
And he's got like a piece of bone stuck in his throat, and he presumably choked. And he was apparently this guy who died was a real piece of work, and nobody really liked him, and he was a bit of a bully.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so all these weird things start to happen where one person starts getting dropped off and dying, and then the next person in this small village.
Yeah.
And she's convinced that
the animals are attacking the people because she's an animal lover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much an animal lover, and she
in fact that so much an animal lover that she never describes her dogs as being dogs. She describes them as daughters. So for the longest time, I don't know if you caught this, but like for the longest time, I thought she was talking about her girls. So I'm like, oh, something really tragic has happened to this woman.
But she equated. Anyway. She says in the story where someone actually calls her out and says, "Listen, hey, you care more about the animals than you do about humans," and she says, "No, actually, I value both equally." Yeah. So she has some very strong opinions about things, and she seems like she's a fighter, and she'll stand up for what's right, what she believes is right.
Which I felt like is very fitting for the era that she was. I don't know. Like I feel like I've met a lot of people around that age who have similar mentalities.
Yeah, very.
A little bit quirky, a little bit eccentric, but very strong in their will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially. We're not obviously going to give away, much of the plot, but it has an interesting ending. It has an interesting twist, and throughout it's like I wouldn't say it's like any stereotypical mystery novel. There's no sense of like eeriness very much. Maybe a little bit in terms of like. What's going on with the animals? Are they possessed? But what's interesting to mention is that like the author herself is a trained psychologist.
Yeah.
So there is something interesting about the fact like where she draw.
I would say it was like more like
that.
Yeah, it was because I wouldn't say the character is cold. I have to correct myself. She's more like calculated. Like there's something.
She seemed very driven. There's something very driven about her.
Driven, yeah, that's the right
There's
word.
Something very driven about her. Like she has a real purpose and a will, and she's going for it. Yeah. Against all obstacles.
But anger was like the main emotion that came through over and over again. It was like real frustration and anger that she seemed to carry with her.
And there was almost a sense of like divine anger. There was like, almost like I guess she's kind of like feeding into William Blake, right? This is why William Blake comes into the way. There's like a sense in which nature takes its revenge, and there's like this sort of like almost like religious, spiritual sort of like energy that somehow like manifests that kind of vengeance upon humanity for being so crass and brutal and indifferent towards the care of nature and animals.
And I liked that aspect of it, and I also found there's like quite a few moments where I like chuckled.
Yeah, there's some funny
moments where she's just so strong-willed that she like, even despite looking completely nutters, she like tells her little story about how the animals are killing people, and funnily enough, she like somehow convinced a large mass of people that like that had to be the reality. There wasn't really a murder out there. It was like animals taking their revenge.
So when I was like listening to the woman sort of espousing this sort of viewpoint, I found it interesting where I was like, oh, is this going to be like Daphne du Maurier's Birds? Where Alfred Hitchcock made the movie Birds based on Daphne du Maurier's book, and the idea earlier from that, which was she based it on an earlier novel, is this idea that like after the war, humanity lost their right to to rule over the animal kingdom, and the birds actually take revenge. And like it upsets the natural order, right? So I was wondering if she was moving in that direction, and that it actually was true that animals were taking vengeance on humans, because a lot of the book involves hunters. Like almost the whole village, all the men are kind of like hunters in the village, like sporting game hunters, right? Yeah. And I think she was almost like a voice to protect the voice. Well, yeah, for the animals.
Yeah. She would say that she was like the spirit of the animals, right? Yeah. In protection of them. Anyway, it was definitely different.
It was definitely.
If you want something to
different.
Shake up your usual reading.
Yeah.
It'll provide you with that.
Exactly.
Okay. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's go into the next one. So this one is actually fell upon my lap because it was given to me by a friend of mine, and it's by Romain Gary, and he is one of the most famous French writers of the latter half of the 20th century, which is very interesting. I mean, I admit my ignorance of all of these contemporary matters because I don't read very much after like 1940 type literature. Yeah. But it's very interesting in the sense that this gentleman was obviously a novelist, a film director, a World War II aviator, a diplomat, and obviously the author of more than 30 novels, essays, and recollections. And so...
And when was this one published?
This one was published, I believe it was 1976. Okay. So it's called Hocus Bogus. Not Hocus Pocus, Hocus Bogus.
Which is already a pun, eh?
And so this was actually translated by David Bellos as Hocus Bogus, but the original would have been pseudo, like like pseudoscience or whatever, right? Yeah. Pseudo. And essentially, what's interesting about this is the author actually ended up marrying an actress, a famous French actress. And this famous French actress actually ended up having an affair with Clint Eastwood, which is very, who knew? Wow. So, so like I say, there's something about this that this author's life that makes him even more interesting. So that's just the beginning. So essentially, Romain Gary was very famous quite early on in his career, and he wrote a lot of sort of old-style, traditional French literature that very much was, it wasn't covering any ground. It wasn't very groundbreaking, right? It was just very much traditional for a 19th century, early 20th century sort of audience, right? But the thing is, like my friend told me, it's very Balzacian. Like he wrote almost like Balzac with the same type of story. It's very sentimental, right? And so he got one of the most famous awards that you can get is the Prix Goncourt, I believe it's called, and that's one of the highest literary awards in France. Yeah, the Prix Goncourt, and he already won it. And the rules of the award is that you're only allowed to win it once. Well, anyway, he got so popular and he got so kind of like typecast that he kind of got annoyed. And so what he did was he ended up inventing a pseudonym. So he started writing under a false name, and that false name is Émile Ajar. And so he started publishing books as Émile Ajar. And there was this whole thing where he was actually really making fun of, almost like it was a big ruse against the literary establishment, because many people were convinced that they actually met an Émile Ajar, and they're talking about Émile Ajar and who is Émile Ajar, and all the public really wanted to find out who this famous guy was. And this Émile Ajar, the books that were published under his name, it was so popular that they actually ended up giving him the Prix Goncourt again. Except obviously he couldn't get it because he already won once. Oh, so it was a different pseudonym like won as well. Hilarious. Right? And so there was this sense where everyone wanted to know who this mystery author was. And he kind of wanted to break away from the mold and to try to like escape from this sort of typecast, right? Sort of vision that people had of him. And so what he ended up doing was he ended up writing this particular book, there were a few that he published under the pseudonym, but this one he actually ends up confessing to the public that he is in fact Pavel Pavlovich. And who is Pavel Pavlovich? Pavel Pavlovich is his cousin's son. So he took his cousin's son's name by his permission and said, we're going to expose who this pseudonym Emil Ajar is, and we're going to say it's you. So he ends up writing, get this, so follow me here. He ends up writing as Pavel Pavlovich, who's feigning schizophrenia or insanity or some sort of schizoid personality, convincing the public that he is in fact Emil Ajar, but in reality, all of these characters are Romain Gary.
Wow.
Yeah, so it gets it gets really convoluted.
Wow, who is that? Wow, someone has a lot of like, I don't know, some interesting. Like,
Yeah. And then he finally ended up releasing like a short essay, kind of exposing all that. In fact, he was all of these people, right?
I just don't understand why. Like, I get having a pseudonym so that you can become something like different out of your typecast, but why make it so convolutedly difficult?
It was like very meta. It's like a very meta. So it was like a huge trickster sort of move.
Yeah.
So
clearly,
getting to the book. So it's one of the strangest books.
And what does it say? Does it say that writing as Emile Ajar? That's hilarious. They should have been like put the whole thing there.
Yeah. It was one of the strangest books I've read, to be honest. There is a certain vivacity to the writing. There's a certain energy to the writing. And it's actually quite like, getting past the first 30 pages of trying to understand what's actually happening. There's a certain excitement to the language that's used because there's a lot of double entendres, a lot of plays on words, a lot of weird, quirky things. So the main character is supposed to be this Pavel Pavlovich, who is writing as Emil Ajar, but at the same time, he's like this very schizophrenic personality. So he's imitating a schizophrenic person's thoughts and speech. But in a way, through this deception and double deception, Romain Gary, the actual writer, is actually giving the truth behind who he is.
Oh.
So in a way, he's being completely 100% honest through a completely false novel, false identities.
That's just,
Yeah. And so, I know. It's like, what the heck? So
that's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, exactly. And so essentially, like, it talks about like sort of this writer who's struggling with his identity, and he's struggling with sort of he's actually expressing the full truth of experiences in life in a very sort of unartificial way, like in a very honest way, but through a schizophrenic's eyes. So all the paradoxes, all of the hypocrisy that you find in everyday life, he's exposing it.
I have a question. Was the pseudo like his nephew or something?
So yeah.
Was he actually schizophrenic?
No,
they
he
just
wasn't.
Made him look schizophrenic?
No, he wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there was like a little bit of suggestion that perhaps he actually ended up committing suicide.
Oh. Maybe he was schizophrenic.
Yeah, he ended up shooting himself in the chest.
Wow.
Yeah, so
maybe he was then. Well, really, there's something off about
yeah, we don't know, but he in all the way he kind of like pokes fun at
that's really confusing.
Yeah, he pokes fun at psychoanalysis. He pokes fun at sort of like government dictatorships. He pokes fun all over the map of literary figures, and through this sort of like it's a very revealing book, but very veiled as well through all these different identities.
Yeah, have you read anything similar to it before? I know it's not your typical genre that you.
It's not my typical genre, but I would say like parts of Nabokov, like Vladimir Nabokov, I find.
And Balzac.
Well, Balzac was kind of like his original style.
Okay.
When he was first getting really popular. Not this one, right? This one became like almost like very much like a real turnaround in terms of the author's style, right? But yeah, I would say Vladimir Nabokov a bit. Like there's a lot of like playfulness and meta fiction. One thing I wanted to say about this book was that there's this French philosopher. One is a French philosopher, and the other one was a French psychoanalyst, and together they wrote a book. So they're Deleuze and Guattari, and they wrote a book called Anti-Oedipus, and it's like this philosophical call to action treatise or whatever against like a capitalistic society. This was all very popular. Actually, that was published 2 years before this book was published. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had read that and kind of got inspired by it. And actually, I looked up, there's some French articles that talk about maybe the links between these two. But they argue that in a capitalistic modern society, that the true authenticity is a schizophrenic, the schizoid personality. Because what it does is like capitalism or, you know, whatever sort of economic and philosophical and political situation creates such a disjointed part of the psyche that almost like the schizophrenic is a truly authentic person in a society with all the paradox.
There's the connection to the other book.
That's exactly right. That's why
Olga was always saying that there is something more normal
about ill people,
about people who have some form of illness.
Yeah.
And so she was always trying to find someone who she thought was normal, or I think in the way that she described normal was someone who's like a caring, genuine human being. Was more
authentic.
Like authentic. I think she kind of confused the word, not confused, but interchangeably used the word normal with someone who is more genuine. But she would always quote that, right? She'd be like, "Oh, what's wrong with this person? What's wrong with them as far as physical illness goes?" And she figured out. So it's interesting. There's our connection between the two books.
And so, like, I'd say her book and this book, they're both kind of like postmodern. Maybe this is like early postmodern, and hers is more, was a more contemporary postmodern fiction. But with postmodernism as a philosophy, the issue is always fundamentally with authenticity. What does authenticity mean? And there's always a struggle to be most authentic person you can possibly be.
Yeah, I could see that in this other book.
So anyway, so with all the paradoxes, so essentially through, like, he was saying, like, I don't like crossing streets as a pedestrian on red lights. I prefer when it's green, because when you're walking the line, when you're stepping on the line, for you to walk, to cross, that's when the driver of a car can see you best and hit you. So it's best to be more unpredictable crossing a road, because there's less likely chance that you're going to get hit, because you're not going to be lined up with the crosswalk so clearly. So it's like, it's really
I don't know how I feel about that.
It's bizarre. And so he'll say something like this: I don't speak Danish, but not well enough. Yeah. And so there's like he's playing with language essentially. And there's a complete like twist in everything, and sometimes it comes off really nicely, and actually he conveys something quite profound through that paradox. And sometimes you're just like, what the heck? Like your brain starts to feel a little bit numb after a while, because it's like, but it's very energetic, it's very lively. So there's a fun trickster component to it.
I like tricksters.
Yeah. So shall we rate these?
Yeah, I'll give this one first. Ready?
Okay. I would rate this actually a good 4 out of 5.
Oh, good.
I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I would enjoy it. I didn't at first, but I really came to like it.
Cool. Okay, what about?
Unfortunately,
I can't read that one. I didn't read it. Sorry.
Yeah. But we don't have the book, so there's other books.
Went to a library instead of buying.
We actually got a library book this time.
Yeah.
So how would you rate that one?
I would give it 3.4.
That's exactly what I would have given it myself.
Yeah. But it's tough, because it's like, it is something that I would say compared to a lot of modern authors I've read, there wasn't a part of it that I really disliked. And sometimes I find with some more contemporary modern stuff, I just can't even finish it. So I think it was, I enjoyed it from beginning to end. It's
just funny because, I would agree, 3.4 as well. But like, there are some modern writers who are actually beautiful writers. Like, it's the aesthetics of the style, sort of the imagery. But like here, I didn't feel it. It felt too, what's the word? It's almost like streamlined, or like too, I don't know. There wasn't any flourish to the writing. I just felt it was very matter-of-fact, straightforward, and like very simple writing.
It was more about like clearly not the overall moral, but the thing that was captivating about it was the quirky character.
Yeah.
Right.
Who can get a little bit annoying. I found her a little bit annoying at times.
Yeah.
She got a little bit.
Yeah.
You just like.
I think that's the point, though. It's like she's kind of annoying. Part of her.
Yeah. Anyway,
anyway.
Well, thank you for joining us again this evening.
As always,
Stay in touch and comment if you've read any of these books.
Yeah. And if you have any recommendations that are similar to these ones, I'd read something else that maybe has more flourish to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.